Good afternoon. Welcome to the last AHA of 2024. My name is Lindsay. You probably are wondering where Jamie is. I am filling in for her today. I will be doing just the facilitation of this AHA. So thank you for joining us for our last AHA of 2024. I cannot believe we are already through the year. Just a reminder to you that attend our sessions quite often. We will be taking a break in December, but we will be back in January. Nikki is going to be posting the link in the chat box. So please sign up, get your registration in. I would like to pass it off to our speaker today, Michael Godet. He is a fractional CMO, and he will be bringing us through understanding your ideal client profile. So I will let him take it away.
Awesome. No, thanks, Lindsay. Appreciate that. Also, apologize. Zoom has sort of changed things around a little bit, and my lighting, I'm just trying to sort of figure that out. So hopefully you could all see me. And I'm operating it in a basement that could have more light, but I'm sorry it does not. All right, you should all be able to see my screen here. So basically the topic I want to take you through today, just understanding, who normally joins AHA webinars and that sort of thing, try to sort of tailor it to the audience here, but basically how to understand your ideal client profile and how it can sort of help you sort of generate more predictable revenue. So just for a quick agenda, I'm just going to go over about me, just to give you an idea as to where are these crazy ideas coming from, that sort of thing, some background on myself. And also just why is this topic relevant to you as a business leader, right? So I know that you might think ICP and you might think marketing, that sort of thing, but I guess I hold the belief that, this is integral for really any business and any business leader to really understand these concepts. How this all fits together, so the presentation structure, or sort of the topics, I guess, and then the structure of the presentation, going through each of the different sort of areas. So identifying product market fit, evaluating ICPs and buyer journey, transforming company CRMs to generate predictable revenue, and leveraging insights to drive more marketing generated revenue. And then there'll be a summary, and I'll make sure to leave some time for Q&A. And one thing as well, I should mention on the Q&A front, if there's anything from a clarification sort of perspective, maybe you're not aware of a term or something like that, feel free to put that in the chat as well, because happy to address things like that sort of on the fly, because these concepts often build on each other. So don't want to lose people sort of midway through. But we'll have a more fulsome sort of Q&A about 45, 50 minutes in. Okay, about me. So basically, I've been operating as a fractional CMO for about 4.5 years. I'm a solopreneur, run my own company called 80/20 CMO. These slides will be shared after the presentation, I should mention. So, there's hyperlinks embedded within, so feel free to go through and take a look. So I've collaborated with about 14 companies during this time as fractional CMO, primarily B2B SaaS companies that have raised between $3 and $15 million of venture capital funding or equivalent and need to aggressively grow their ARR MRR. I tell you that mainly to just understand this is the lens by which I kind of view the world quite a bit. But the concepts from a B2B SaaS perspective, I believe that they are applicable from a just general B2B and even a lot of B2C. This ideal client profile stuff that we're going to be talking about today. I work in 12-week engagements. That's how I collaborate with companies. And prior to that, I led up sales and marketing operations for Benevity, which is a Calgary-based company and the second unicorn from Calgary. So I was part of that roller coaster. And there I managed the BDR team, demand gen, digital, and technology when it came to sales and marketing, including CRM and measurement and analytics and forecasting, blah, blah, blah. So prior to that, I held senior marketing positions with Neo Financials, the third unicorn in Calgary, but I was sort of earlier on via Harvest part of that. And then I ran the marketing for an airline as well, which is kind of funny. And then I was at iStock Photo. So I also teach a course on fractional leadership hosted on Maven. So just a side note there. And they're just education stuff. Okay, so why is this topic relevant to me? You might be wondering if you did shotgun it, why is Death of Socrates here? And as you all might be aware, there's something called the Socratic method, asking good questions in order to sort of elucidate wisdom and that sort of idea. So that's the way I kind of think about this, right? In terms of your business leaders, you want to sort of figure out what's best for your business, that sort of thing. So asking who I term as the operating team, the folks that are running marketing, running sales, that sort of thing, these kinds of questions from a place of, curiosity, and, let's say a little bit of wisdom in the sense of understanding ICP at a high level and buyer journey at a high level, that will help you get better results by asking the right questions is kind of the idea here. So not my intention to make you an ICP master by the end of this by any means, but just to arm you with the tools that you need in order to have better conversations with your teams. So why is it relevant? So most early stage companies, I would argue, and even many that are further along, don't actually have their ICP figured out. They don't actually have their ideal client profile figured out. Okay. Companies that understand this, in my opinion, will have a better chance of effectively scaling. And we'll get into the why of that. And in relation to, in order to scale, you need to have sort of predictable revenue kind of figured out to an extent, right? Because growing the way that you have been growing is not necessarily sustainable because you can't add 2x the amount of people with to get 2x the amount of revenue. You need to be a bit sharper than that. Um, and then business leaders that know about ICPs, they ask better questions. Again, going back to Socrates, and can better assess the revenue pipeline predictability. I know a number of people on this call, or maybe most people, they've occupied roles in terms of financial leadership and that sort of thing, right? And so when somebody comes to you and says, "Hey, this is what we're going to do in terms of revenue this quarter, this year, that sort of thing," for you to be able to understand, hey, like what's behind that prediction? Really? How much is it based on sort of tried and true clients that we've had before, and they're essentially just they've identified the characteristics of those clients, and that's what we're going after? Or is it more of, Bob thinks we're going to do this, or Amanda thinks we're going to do this, which isn't necessarily as predictable or as scalable, I would argue. Um, and you can better understand where your company's at. So what phase is your company at? Is your company at a point where, or business is if you are consulting? So are you at a point whereby you are ready to scale? Meaning that you actually have a definable ICP and buyer journey that you can, pound and get 1,000 times the amount of people from that grouping, and you could do very well. Or are you still trying to figure it out? Are you still sort of in, call it throw spaghetti at the wall mode in order to see what's working, what's not working, and going from there? So that's very important to know because the only thing worse than not scaling when you're ready is scaling before you're actually ready. And that leads to a ton of problems. Um, and I'll just mention this again, right? Like, so, from a B2B SaaS perspective, this kind of stuff is kind of table stakes and very important and that sort of thing. I'd argue that, other industries can, maybe take a bit from this and apply it in their own sort of context, and it would benefit them from a bottom line perspective. Okay, how this all fits together. So firstly, product market fit, which I'll get into the definition and that sort of thing. That's needed in order to have a meaningful ICP and buyer journey, and that'll become apparent when we get into it. ICP and buyer journey is needed to have a predictable revenue pipeline management. Okay, and then you need effective revenue pipeline management via CRM. This is necessary but not sufficient in order to scale revenue production. But then basically what you need is you need the ICP and the buyer journey, as well as effective pipeline revenue management in order to scale that inbound revenue. So you need those two components here. Okay. So structure of the presentation. So basically the way that I thought about it for each of the four areas that I already went over is what do you need to know as a business leader? Just during this presentation, if you're to take anything away, just take away these points. So I tried to highlight that sort of right at the beginning of the topic, and sort of, in a way that's understandable, hopefully. And then explanation and illustration of the concepts. So going a bit more deep into the concepts and that sort of thing and seeing how I've sort of applied it and how I sort of go about this with companies and that sort of thing, just in the sense of the things to ask for and all that kind of stuff, just so you know of a bit of a methodology of it that you can take forward. And then questions you can ask as a business leader. So when you're thinking about those board meetings, those quarterly meetings, those monthly meetings potentially, or even if you do sit in on pipeline review meetings, what questions are going to generate the best sort of dialogue and hopefully the best results from that. Okay, so the first topic, so identifying product market fit. Um, so basically, what you need to know as a business leader is that product market fit is somewhat subjective, right? There's different definitions and that sort of thing. For simplicity, the way that I would sort of explain it is it's at that point by which you're shifting from the spaghetti to the wall mode to scaling. So you have enough demonstration of basically you have enough revenue, you have enough clients, you have proven that you're able to retain them and grow those clients, and there's good adoption in terms of what you've done. I think about this in a SaaS context in terms of, they're actually using the features and that sort of thing. But you could also think about that in terms of like, if you're running a consultant shop, that sort of thing. Do you have a retainer with somebody, but let's say they never activate you and that sort of thing, right? That's not the best thing. That's sort of a precursor to churn. Kind of thing. So just making sure you have those things in place. So basically meaningful amount of revenue from meaningful amount of clients. I'm deliberately subjective here, just because it's very different, right? If you're a company that, you have a $1 million average contract value, it might be different than if you have, a $500 average contract value. You might want a higher N or a higher number of folks if you're on the lower end of that ACV, and you might not have the liberty of having a ton when you're at the higher point of that ACV, especially earlier on. Um, yeah, so I mentioned product adoption already, that sort of thing. And yeah, so because basically what you want is you don't want to say, okay, we have a great ICP. Here's our ICP because these are the people who are in our pipeline. That's not demonstrated that, firstly, they haven't even signed a contract. Secondly, even if they have signed a contract, they have to have experienced that value from you, right? That value exchange is something that is worthwhile for them, and they are going to, continue to use you and that sort of thing. Because that's the kind of revenue you want to scale, right? You don't want to scale revenue that like you don't even know if it's actually a fit with a particular industry, with a particular use case, that sort of thing. You want that demonstrated proof that you have actually found that fit. And I kind of put it this way. I mean, especially if you are from more of a analytical financial acumen background, the idea of like if somebody says we have product market fit because, one client really, really loves us, is that enough? That's probably not enough, right? Like the idea of like that's a limited sample size of data. We need more here. So use your own smell test is what I would sort of advise. Okay, so how I go about sort of doing this with the companies I collaborate with. So basically, look to the companies with the highest revenue, okay, or I should say, the highest revenue growth. But make sure that that revenue growth that that client has had with you is actually a point where it's material, right? So, like, let's say your average contract value is, let's say it's 100,000 a year, let's say, right? And so the clients that are 300, 400, 500,000, great. Like consider those ones within that set potentially. But then the ones that let's say they're at 150 or something like that, but they've been growing 150,000, but they've been growing dramatically the past few years and they're on a good growth curve, consider those as well, right? But if a client's grown by 500% this year, but they've gone from, $2,000 to $10,000, don't consider them within the set, right? Because those aren't the ones that you're going to want to, scale dramatically and that sort of thing, right? So that's kind of the idea. And then the other part of this, and this is key, is that you want the clients that are satisfied, right? You want the clients that, are delighted and astounded by what you're able to produce and that sort of thing. There's a number of different ways to identify these clients. I mean, one, you've probably, and your marketing team might have, done the work in order to get testimonials, get case studies. So those ones that are really, really solid, chances are, those are good fits for to be part of this, as long as the revenue is meaningful, that they're able to that they provide you and that sort of thing. Um, Sales team can also help out in this respect in terms of reference clients that offer references and all that sort of stuff as well. And then there's other things like NPS score if you're of a certain size and that sort of thing. So net promoter score, which is basically likelihood to recommend, that kind of idea. So basically what I say is, and this is a bit of a logic function. I don't have a philosophy degree, but I guess I'm mentioning a few different things here. But basically, like what you want is you want one and or two and three in place. And those are the kinds of companies that you should consider here. And then basically, what you want to do is you want to go to client success or customer success, whatever we sort of call it, customer service, and validate that these are actually good clients, right? Meaning that these aren't the ones that are, sweating you really hard, potentially using up those resources. So chatting with those client success leaders will help you sort of in the front line, will help you understand that, whether or not they sort of fit within that category. And a lot of people want a rule of thumb, and I provide it here. I put it in bold. Is you want at least three here. You want at least three that are just like, yeah, if we are to get 1,000 more of any of these clients, like our lives would be so much better. Like that's what you kind of want here. But yeah, like I said, meaningful sort of amount. Um, and basically, if you haven't reached that point yet, that's okay. That's the phase that your company's at right now. So the idea of, doing this kind of really, really robust ICP buyer journey analysis stuff, it's a little too soon, and I wouldn't recommend actually expending the resources because you don't have the data points to rationalize it, right? So basically what I would say is try to mark down your hypotheses that you have in terms of who you're going after, why you're going after them, that sort of thing. Be more nimble with it, but be honest with yourself in terms of what has worked and what has not worked, so that you can continue learning on that path to getting to product market fit. Okay. So basically questions to ask yourself and your operating team in relation to product market fit. So and I'll let for just time, I won't read out all the questions and that sort of thing, but just some key things to sort of understand here. Do they know or understand the concept of product market fit? A lot of people don't. And it might be a good thing for them to understand, for them to appreciate that sort of thing, and sort of think about the company evolution in that kind of way, right? Um, if they do, does their definition of product market fit pass the smell test? So as a reasonable, assumably, quantitatively oriented person, are you able to sort of say, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. It makes sense for us to, put our chips on the table and actually say, hey, yes, we want to get 1,000 more of these kinds of clients because we've been successful with those kinds of clients. And do the metrics presented, justify the stage that you're at? If a company says, hey, we need to scale right now, does that actually fit in terms of what you've actually demonstrated from a value provided perspective, not from a pipeline generation perspective, not from even a closed won revenue perspective, but actually those folks, they've not only paid you, but they're quite happy to keep paying you and for you to, potentially escalate your rates, and they would still be happy to. Okay, the second part, constructing ICPs and buyer journeys. What you need to know as a business leader. So ICP guiding companies should satisfy the ICP criteria. Now you'll notice that the Venn diagram that I have here very much looks like the Venn diagram that was a few slides ago, right? And that's because basically the guiding companies, so the companies that are essentially, if you think about it from a research perspective, kind of like the primary research sort of entities that you're going to be looking at for this, they should all map to that criteria, right? So they should all be the either highest revenue or fast growth with a meaningful amount of revenue, and client success team says they're great to deal with. It's all good. They're going to be with us forever. That sort of idea. So those are the companies that you want to sort of figure out. And then basically I advocate for is actually primary research. So it's not about, what the head of sales said or the account executive says, or marketing or even the CEO, what they say about this. Because, that's imbued with subjectivity. and that sort of thing. What you want to do is actually have conversations with folks from a person who's unbiased in the process. So I wouldn't recommend these conversations in terms of understanding them in great depth happen from the person who sold to them, or even happen from the CEO. Because, especially if you have Canadian clients and that sort of thing, there's a desire to be polite and to be nice and to not ruffle feathers and that sort of thing, right? And so you want the straight goods, and you want folks to be able to go in and provide that. Marketing is actually a good place because generally marketers haven't had that one-to-one interaction and that sort of thing. So having somebody conduct that primary research in an unbiased way is pretty important. Um, and then ICP and buyer journey is for the whole company. This isn't a marketing exercise. Where this fails is where it becomes seen as a marketing pet project and that sort of thing. The insights that are derived from here, and this will become apparent later in the presentation, are absolutely usable by the entire revenue team, and I would argue actually the entire organization, because this gives us a clear distillation based on evidence. Um, you know, who are the people that we really, really do well with, and what do they love, what do they not love, and how do they go about buying and experiencing value at the end of the day? That's good insights for anybody to have that is in any way touching that client, including product development if we're thinking about it from a more software lens. And buyer journey is absolutely critical to all this. That's going to give you sort of the map in terms of, okay, so what channels, what targeting, what kind of messaging, what forms of content really resonate with this audience. And this will sort of determine what the revenue roadmap should look like for your company. And then ICP is never done. So the idea, because think about it, right? If your data set's changing in terms of like now it's these clients that are top revenue clients and that sort of thing. So chances are what happens is that it doesn't necessarily exactly change, 100% every year, anything like that. But if you had 3 in your set and now you have 6 because you've sort of grown, you got to look at those other 3 and how should you be altering that ICP based on this? And when the time's right, if there's clear distinctions in terms of, let's say, industry, use case for what you're providing, stuff like that, it might make sense to have 2 separate ICPs. But do that only at when it is time to do so, because different ICPs necessitate different channels, different messaging, different tactics, just like on the ground, right? So one group of folks might be more event oriented sort of marketing strategy and that sort of thing. Another group might be more, paid media oriented and that sort of thing. And that might be the way to activate them. That means different kinds of specialists or agencies or contractors and that sort of thing. 2 different revenue stacks, if you will, and even different salespeople potentially that can actually get in with these different orgs. So I say this, a lot of companies that I've encountered, basically they say, oh, we have 3 ICPs. And, let's say they're at $1 million or $3 million in revenue or that sort of thing. I'm like, well, let's validate that, right? Like how many actually meet that mark that we sort of mentioned before? And most often, if you're talking two or more ICPs, the revenue numbers better be pretty high, I'd argue. Okay. Just want to level set on definitions here. So ICP, ideal client profile, I already explained that. So there's 2 parts to it essentially, okay? Or I guess 3 parts in practice. One is the personas part. So there's actually the company persona. So when you think about the firmographics and all that sort of stuff, like who are those companies that we've knocked it out of the park with, right? What does that look like from an employee composition perspective, from a revenue perspective, from industry, sub-industry, all those sort of things? What does that kind of look like in practice for each of these companies? And then the different personas that are involved. So that's everybody who's relevant in that buyer journey. So who's experiencing the pain, who's going about and evaluating alternatives as to who to get, all that sort of stuff. Who's helping with implementation, who's actually experiencing the value at the end of the day. And then, of course, who's signing that contract and that sort of thing as well. So all those are players. So think about the economic buyer. Think about procurement. Is that a player in the process? Think about frontline. And then with every company, what you really want to understand is a champion. Because generally speaking, if we are talking about a B2B purchase, there is somebody internally that they get bought in first, and then they're pushing it with you. right? And they're trying to get buy-in with the company. So understanding that champion in more detail. And then the buyer journey is essentially all the way from problem awareness, or even experiencing the pain, all the way through experiencing value. You want to understand the machinations of all these companies where they've actually gone through it and they're at a great place right now. What was their journey? What does that look like? Okay. So this is exciting. This is what actually a well-crafted ICP buyer journey can actually provide for the company, right? So basically, it could provide the messaging. So you might want to say that, yeah, your product is great because of XYZ, but maybe it's actually ABC. That's actually the thing that was appealing, right? And often what I see is that folks they talk about maybe features a lot and that sort of thing, and maybe they don't talk about benefits as much, right? So the idea of a benefit is like, okay, like, oh, this software, speeds up our response times by, 20 minutes or something like that. But like the benefit is like, yeah, we're able to handle this many more and save this much money through this. So that's just a bit of an articulation of that. Um, so what is the messaging? What should it actually be based on primary research, not based on what the CEO wants or what you want or what marketing wants or what sales wants, right? Based on actual data. The channels to be used. So what channels were effective in activating these people that are fantastic and you want to get more of? They talk about the story that they went through, right, for this. Um, Now, and I'll allude to this at the later in the presentation. Obviously, there's going to be new channels to test and that sort of thing that you haven't sort of discovered. But I recommend sort of piloting those new channels and sort of coming up with a hypothesis and sort of evaluating the effectiveness of them against baseline channels, right? So, but basically, the channels that have worked, you want to be able to identify them. And in relation to this targeting, right? So the targeting within the channels. So saying that, okay, we're going to go after these people, this age, or this degree qualification, or this location, or what have you. And then the assets. So you'll get to understand, okay, was it that white paper you put out and or that webinar that you did or that event that you went to or all that sort of stuff, right? Like what was sort of the format that of information that they received that was compelling to them and wanted and got them to move to the next stage. And then life cycle and deal definitions. This is more of a CRM sort of concept, and I'll get into that in more detail later. But this is what ICP and buyer journey can provide, which is quite I think a great investment and quite remarkable. Here's some examples, just in terms of, and you can refer back to these and that sort of thing, ideal company profile, and buyer persona, user persona, that sort of thing. And then this is a bit of a buyer journey, and you'll see that this is from Forrester. I mean, I'm sure you all know Forrester, but you'll notice that it's 2015, right? And the thing is, like, I know that this is 9 years old, but like these concepts don't change. What changes is like, okay, what are the channels that are effective on this? How do we target that? How do we leverage these channels? How do we leverage AI in order to get in front of these people? Like all that sort of stuff, that changes. But the idea of like, there's a pain point, somebody seeks a solution, they evaluate alternatives, they make a decision, they put it in place, they experience value. Those are timeless. Like it's going to be probably, and I guess we could record this and we can go back and say, Mike, you were terribly wrong. But I'm guessing in 9 years we'll come back and it'll be the same. But a lot will change in terms of how to activate these people effectively. So basically how to go about doing this. So I really recommend that this is not a siloed exercise for marketing, right? This is sales, marketing, client success, and senior leadership are involved in this process. Okay. You need buy-in from everybody. If you don't have buy-in from everybody, or I shouldn't say everybody, like the individuals that I highlight here. If you don't have buy-in from those individuals, it won't work because you need everybody singing from the same songbook here. Okay. Um, so identifying the guiding companies that should be included in your ICP, be very clear. What are your definitions for this? Like what's the revenue sort of cutoff that we're using here, or revenue growth sort of metric that you're using here? How are you validating that they actually were, they're great supporters of the company and that sort of thing, and client success likes them. Like make sure to just document all that, right? Because what you want to do, you're creating something objective here, right? If you imbue any subjectivity, then that undermines this exercise. Because the thing is, the CEO has ideas, The, VP of finance has ideas. The like and this sort of this debate amongst folks based on subjectivity and based on anecdotal. The idea is that this exercise that's being done should be something that trumps all that. Um, Yeah, and then gather the primary research. At the very least, the champions need to be talked to and understand their whole journey. Don't ask leading questions, that sort of thing. Approach it from a place of curiosity. You're not approaching it from any other sort of lens here. Make sure to record those conversations as well. They're invaluable conversations, and as well, they're great training resources. They're great just from okay, anybody have issues with the ICP? Okay, here are the recordings. Go and watch. Let us know what conclusions would you come to that are different than what we have based on what's been said by these individuals, right? Um, so basically, document the findings, as I mentioned, craft distilled ICP buyer journey, with all the points of commonality identified. So that's basically, imagine that you have like a spreadsheet. Everybody's aware of spreadsheets. You have a spreadsheet and you have, okay, company one, here's all the different criteria for, firmographics and buyer persona and all that sort of stuff. And then number two, you have this, number three, number four for the different companies. Then have a column at the end that's like, looking at these, what are the main points of distillation commonality between them that we can actually say, oh, well, they're all, later stage companies or blah blah blah. Like, what are those points of commonality that we can really drill in on, right? And again, if you don't have those points of commonality, you might not have product market fit just yet. Um, and socialize and get buy-in on this before you finalize it. So I actually recommend showing the rough to, call it those people that I've highlighted above and that sort of thing. And the reason for that, you want people to know that, hey, this is a process. We're coming up with this, and we're open to feedback and that sort of thing. What shouldn't happen though is, again, like somebody's like, okay, that looks good, but I want to imbue a bunch of subjectivity into it. You don't want that, but you don't want to present something that's highly stylized and say this is what we got, this is the first draft, we're not listening to anybody. So people need to feel heard and that sort of thing, so that's why I recommend sort of doing it in that way. And then once buy-in with those stakeholders, do a more stylized one, and you could sort of release it company-wide. And I'd recommend actually, doing a presentation and getting feedback from people and getting them to understand, especially how is this going to be used? How is it going to be used by marketing? How is it going to be used by sales? How is it going to be used by client success? Because there's so many applications of this, and it should be highlighted, right? What you don't want is that people just think this is an exercise all for naught, and this is just going to go on a shelf or something like that. Or it's a marketing exercise, like I said. Okay. So questions to ask yourself and your operating team. So do they understand the concept? So similar flow as last time, right? Do they understand the concept? Can they identify the ICP for their business? What's their ICP based on? Is it based on that subjectivity that they all sort of have? And another thing that you sort of understand is just like, what's the degree of alignment between different leaders, right? Because often enough, like one person will say, "Oh, this is our ICP." The CEO will say something, and then the VP of sales will say something else, right? So you got to make sure that there's that kind of alignment there. And if there's not that alignment, chances are they haven't done the work to figure out what is the objective reality. Um, and then how are they using the ICP and buyer journey, right? Because the worst answer is like, yeah, we did it. But yeah, we don't really use it. We don't really refer to it. It doesn't really guide anything. So, I mean, that's not going to help the business. Okay. Um, Next, transforming companies CRM. So customer relationship management software, in case people aren't familiar, to generate predictable revenue. Okay. So what you need to know as a business leader, ICP and buyer journey should drive prospect lifecycle definitions. So these are things like what is a marketing qualified lead, for example, or what is a sales qualified lead, for example, or what is in Salesforce parlance, what is an opportunity, or in HubSpot parlance, what is a deal, right? And having clear criteria for those things that should be driven by the ICP and the buyer journey. That should not be driven by oh, this is what we kind of think. If we kind of think it's a deal, we'll make it into a deal. Like that's not a way to have scalable processes, right? Um, and process should be established for attributing sort of like the what if something does close and that sort of thing, like how do we attribute the value of that? So that should be done and understood through the realm of the or through the sort of prism of the buyer journey. Um, definition of deal opportunity, I already mentioned that. And then the different stages of the opportunity life cycle or deal life cycle should also be driven by the buyer journey. And the way to get the most predictable revenue pipeline is to not make it sales led. And I don't mean that sales aren't leading the process and that sort of thing, but the idea of I'll give you an example of a sales led sort of buyer or sales led revenue pipeline approach, right? So basically, we have I create a deal because I think a deal is created. It should be created. Okay. And then we have I sent a proposal, and then we have I sent a contract, and then we close a deal, right? So, but understanding that buyer journey, maybe the points of commonality, like in terms of just from a buyer-led perspective, maybe all the companies actually had a procurement sort of process and that sort of thing. And the idea of like, for example, like having a stage be, yeah, we have met with procurement, or we have secured this buy-in from procurement. You see how that's more powerful than saying we sent a proposal and that sort of thing. So that those sort of buyer-led stages, as opposed to more sales people driven stages, that's a great way to actually get to a point of more predictability for your pipeline. Because it's anybody, like there could be, and the reason why I have Glenn Ross here, I don't know who's seen the movie or read the play or what have you, or seen the play. But basically, like there's different salespeople, right? So there's salespeople that are very, very, very optimistic, and there's salespeople that are only, let's call it a little bit optimistic. I haven't met a pessimistic salesperson. They don't last if they do exist. You need to have some optimism in your life in order to do that role. And I have a tremendous respect for salespeople. And at the point that I begin collaborating with companies, they're starting with founder-led sales and that sort of thing. Maybe they have a couple account executives, but now what they need to do is they need to, oh, geez, we got this investment from this venture capital firm. We need to really, really ramp this, right? We need to hire 6 more salespeople this year. And we really need to go at our goals. And the thing is, you might be hiring an Alec Baldwin who's, very optimistic, that sort of thing. You might be hiring more of a, Jack Lemmon, who's in this movie, and a bit of a, let's say, the more dour of the type here. And what you need is a system whereby you could actually normalize the deals in there, whereby it doesn't matter who is actually putting in a deal at deal stage 2 or deal stage 4 or what have you. You can actually depend on that being like, okay, well, given the objective standards by which a deal stage 2 actually exists in terms of, let's say it is procurement buy-in or something like that. We know that, it doesn't matter who it is. We know that we have a 30% chance or a 50% chance of closing this. Um, and then another thing too is that, all revenue reporting, having that go, and I don't mean from a Revenue Canada perspective and that sort of thing, or IRS perspective, but I mean it in terms of like, pipeline review meetings and that sort of thing should be done in the CRM. If it's in a spreadsheet, the question is, okay, what's happening when it gets pulled out of the export's pulled out of the CRM and before it actually becomes the final thing, right? That's massaging, that's subjectivity, that's all that sort of stuff, right? So that's why I'm advocating, it being in the CRM. And if it's not in the CRM, asking the reasons why. And you need adoption on this front, like for sure. So consistent process plus CRM adoption. I mean, that's how you get revenue pipeline predictability, in my opinion. Okay, so how to go about doing this? So basically engaging the same people that I mentioned before into these conversations, right? So that's important. This isn't a marketing, you can see this is not a marketing exercise, this is a sales exercise. This is a whole revenue team sort of exercise, I'd argue. Setting the definitions collaboratively for these different stages. So based on, again, the buyer journey and the ICP. So that's what should be the thing that sort of drives what is a lead, what is an MQL, what's an SQL, what's a deal. Okay, so referring back to those like primary source documents. Okay, and then making sure that there is buy-in, approval, that sort of thing of those sales stages. Yeah, just deal definitions, same idea. Like each stage, that sort of idea. And then from there, you can create the automations, the dashboarding, reporting, training, and transition plans that need to happen, including possibly a data migration to a new CRM that is needed, or to ameliorate the situation of a current CRM. And then basically, vetting all end users with the revenue team, vetting dashboards with the senior leadership team, doing training, activate changes and do the transition. And the other thing, being open to improvements and changes as things come up, right? Like in this process, there's no way any individual is going to anticipate exactly how this is going to be used by everyone and that sort of thing. So making sure that there's a clear channels of communication and this isn't all one and done, that sort of idea. So what I have next to here is actually what you want folks to know and believe and feel is that the CRM in this altered form that is ICP and buyer journey driven and is driven by automations and objectivity, it's more of a mech. So a mech is to get into nerdy stuff like a robotic suit that you wear that makes you more powerful, right? That should be the perception from folks. That's the way they should feel by this, right? And they should have improved results from this, right? And the CRMs, I won't get into the nitty gritty of the technology and what it enables, but it does enable this kind of stuff. And what it shouldn't be seen as is a mailbox. CRM, if it's seen as a mailbox, is dead in the water, meaning information goes in and you never see it again. You don't leverage it. It's for Big Brother to understand what I'm doing or not doing. If that takes hold in the organization, this is going to be dead on arrival, this project. Okay. So basically, what are the steps to sort of take here, or just questions to ask? Are they leveraging a CRM at all? Sometimes they might not be. And if a company's really, really early, maybe it doesn't make sense. Get that? But if there's multiple people involved in a sales process, might want to start thinking about it. And there's also, at the beginning, the way pricing works is that they're fairly cheap, and then they scale to become much more expensive. So in the beginning, it's not gonna break the bank too much. HubSpot even has a free offering that you can use with limited functionality. How are they periodically reviewing or updating the revenue pipeline? Is it based on gut, or is it based on actually what's going on with the buyer and that sort of thing? Do they have a firm grasp as to the different revenue stages, and is everybody sort of using the same-ish definitions of that? Are the stages in the revenue pipeline sales-led, or are they buyer-led, like we sort of spoke about before? And then basically on the forecasting side, is the forecast using expected values of each of the different stages, or is it just kind of made up, or more subjective? Do you believe that they're being overconfident or lack confidence in the forecast? So digging in on that and just sort of asking those questions, asking how sure are you on this, for example. And then related to the above, look at the past history, right? Like when you are having conversations with them and that sort of thing in the past, were they overshooting or undershooting their targets, right? So past is often prologue, so just paying attention to that as well. And if somebody has missed the mark and that sort of thing, it's not about, let's say, going and firing the person right away and that sort of idea, but understanding, why didn't it come about? What assumptions do we have in place whereby those assumptions didn't bear out, right? So that we can learn and we can be better. Forecasting, in my mind, is like, it's like a muscle. The more you do it, the better you get at it. Okay, so leveraging insights to drive more marketing generated revenue. What you need to know as a business leader. So marketing strategy should be based on the insights from the ICP and buyer journey, as I mentioned before. And this includes marketing channel selected, targeting on these channels, assets that you decide to create, that sort of thing, should all be driven by those insights. Okay. Resource planning, including hiring and outsourcing, should be based on the bandwidth and competency required to sort of meet that ICP and buyer journey sort of where they are, right? And this could be tough, right? And there's a concept in EOS, which Traction EOS, Gino's book, that sort of thing, which is empty chair sort of theory kind of idea, which is basically when you're looking at your company, it doesn't matter that, Sean, the events person, has been here forever and is friends with everybody and is really fun at the party. If you're hearing that events actually isn't a critical part to getting great clients for you, well, maybe can Sean be upskilled in different ways or that sort of thing? Or is he just not the right fit right now? Maybe he was the right fit in the past, but maybe not anymore. And you might think I'm an evil, cold person, but you know what? Sean's probably not experiencing his best life either in terms of like doing events where they're not useful. He's better to go to a company where he could do events and they are actually quite helpful. That's how I rationalize things, anyways. And then KPI, I argue that the KPIs from a marketing perspective should actually be the marketing generated pipeline that is achieved here, as well as the ROI. So when you think about the total sort of team, that sort of idea, what does it look like in terms of return on investment? And note that, this shouldn't be the case whereby, and I see this in companies often, whereby marketing's held to this standard of accountability and measurement and this sort of thing, and it doesn't happen necessarily with sales or with client success. I actually advocate that it should happen with all the teams so that way the revenue leaders that are in place can make decisions in terms of, well, if we invest in our client success team, in terms of upskilling them, in terms of hiring more, what does that mean in terms of how's that going to change the needle in terms of churn or client growth and that sort of thing? If we hire a BDR team, what's that going to look like? A business development rep team, what's that going to look like in terms of return? And then, or if we, activate an account-based marketing strategy, what's that going to look like in terms of investment? So the idea is to get things to an apples to apples comparison. Okay. So I'm going to go over this really quickly. I want to try to finish by 50 after to leave time for questions. So basically, need to understand the company-wide objectives, and then establish a baseline with one of the channels. And then after that, I really encourage that each channel actually has an owner, and that could be, let's say one person owns multiple channels. That could be the case, and that's cool. But what you don't want is multiple owners of one channel, because then there's not the autonomy, there's not the accountability there, that sort of thing. So, and note that this could be a big cultural shift for companies, right? So, you might have people that are more comfortable in an environment whereby there isn't that accountability. They're not necessarily the ones that, you want around when you're ready to scale, I'd argue. And then basically, like I said, this isn't that hard, right? In the sense of what are the inputs that we're putting into this? What are the outcomes that we're experiencing from a revenue perspective or pipeline generation perspective if there's a long lead time to sale? And then how does that compare to the other things we could be doing? That's basically it. Like it's not, rocket science here. And then, implement the plan, have that channel owner do the forecast, and then evaluate, like after we launch these revenue pilots, what actually happened? Is it what we expected? Is it not what we expected? What have you? And just questions. How well do they know or understand the marketing channels that exist? Was the buyer journey and ICP actually considered when they were coming up with this approach? How well do they understand the performance of the different marketing channels? So even if it's not a revenue-oriented channel, like let's say public relations or something like that, what's the KPI that they're actually using to understand, was this PR agency better than this PR agency? Was PR better this month or last month? Even though it's not linked directly to revenue, you should have some understanding as to, okay, was this a better month or a worse month, right? And that might be, eyeballs from ICP related people or something like that. Impressions, I should say. Are they measuring against pipeline ROI and revenue, or something that's further up the funnel? Are they talking about leads all the time and that sort of thing, and they're not actually far enough down the funnel? And are they viewing things in terms of revenue channels, apples to apples, that sort of thing between the teams when they think of their investment? Or are they very siloed in their approach with different standards applied to different teams? Okay, so just a quick summary. Basically, understanding the operating team and your own sort of familiarity with these concepts is important, right? So maybe folks aren't aware of this, and this could actually help them quite a bit if you just introduce them to the concepts, maybe share this deck with them, that sort of idea. And they can sort of become familiar with it and take what they will from it, right? And incorporate it within their practice. Stress test the application of these ideas. Again, imagining that most people are analytically adept on this call. If they're not passing the smell test, then probably merits a few more questions, right? Um, don't ask leading questions, accusatory questions, anything like that. Try to be curious in the questions that you ask, and try to ask I'd argue, in a way that's more level, dispassionate, that sort of thing. You're all on the same team here. You all want to improve the business. Just being curious and trying to get that good dialogue going is important. And point them in the right directions. If you do have resources that do know more about this stuff and that sort of thing, point them in the direction appropriate to that, so they can have more meaningful conversations. That's it.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael.
No worries.
So now we will open it up to any questions that you might have. Please put in the chat and I can ask Michael. We'll give you just a second or two to field your questions here. I do have one just that,
Yeah.
and I could be, it could just be a me thing. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the channels. I heard you say marketing channels, revenue channels. Can you give specific examples for our audience, just to have a little bit more clarity around it?
Sure. So when I talk about revenue channels, this is any sort of way that you can garner more revenue. Okay. So basically, there's a few different ways that you can do so. From a client success or customer success perspective, you can keep more of the clients that you have, right? So you could decrease churn rate and that sort of thing. And that helps you from a revenue perspective, right? Or you can actually grow existing clients. So you could actually have, through, good interactions with them, through introducing them to new features that you have, upsell, cross-sell, that sort of thing, you can grow revenue in that way, right? So that's on the client success side of things. On the sales side of things, the way that you can generate more revenue is that you could do what is commonly termed as outbound activities. So basically, when you think about that, that's hiring a business development rep or sales development rep team, and they go out and they make calls, or they do emails or that sort of thing, and they go about those things, right? And that's in hopes of getting leads that turn into deals that turn into closed won revenue. So that's another
Yeah.
channel that could be activated, right?
So
Different
like
inputs.
prospecting activities.
Yeah, prospecting. Exactly. That's another way to term it for sure, Lindsay. And then on the marketing channel side, it's what can generate inbound related revenue and that sort of thing, right? And how can you do that? Well, you could do that through, let's say, organic search. So that's when you don't pay Google and that sort of thing, and they index you effectively, that kind of idea. You could also think about that concept from an AI perspective and trying to get in with ChatGPT and sort of trying to get them to sort of index you effectively and that sort of idea, right? There's also paid media, so different paid media channels that you can use in order to get more leads that hopefully turn into more pipeline, that hopefully turn into more sales, right? So, Google ads, LinkedIn ads, Twitter ads, all that sort of stuff, right? Um, and then there's some other levers, other than like there's events as well, but there's also other levers that you can do, right? So another thing that can be done is actually what I would term as sort of, revenue stage optimization. So basically, you can increase the conversion rate from stage to stage to stage to stage, and that will impact revenue in a positive way, right? You can increase your conversion rate from MQL to SQL. Let's say it's at 80% and you make it 90%. That's going to be good. That's going to impact you down the road in terms of revenue production. So those are sort of the different channels, and those are the different things that you can choose to invest in, invest more in if you're already doing it, invest less in if you're already doing it. Mothball if it's not working effectively. But what I argue is that basically, all these channels should be seen as, sort of like equivalent in the sense of like inputs, outcomes. How do I see that?
Awesome. Yeah, when you're talking about kind of switching from, like, would you be talking about the processes from the marketing qualified lead to the sales qualified lead? Like when you're digging in to, is it the process on how you, I guess, get to that point?
Yeah,
Just
yeah, for
that's
sure.
what you would be
So
digging into?
Well, basically, like the idea is like, let's say, for example, industry standard is we should be at 90% and we're at 80% in terms of that micro conversion rate. Okay.
Okay,
Well, basically understanding though, like okay, well, what is the SLA or service level agreement that is in place between sales and marketing, right? Meaning that when a lead comes in, that is marketing qualified lead. So a very, very good lead maps to ICP, maps to buyer journey effectively, all that stuff, right? Um, what is the amount of time that is we would consider the maximum amount of time before that inquiry is responded to from a salesperson,
yeah.
right? So, for example, in the case where, let's say, you're maybe 80% instead of 90%, there might not be an SLA in place. There might be an SLA in place, but it's not being followed. There might be an SLA in place, but it's too long of time. So you might have a 48-hour SLA on a form response, which I would never recommend. But so those are things that you can do. You can tighten up, or even digging into, okay, well, how are we responding to these? Like, maybe we're doing it within the time and that sort of thing. But what's the message that we're putting across there? Are we, for example, saying to folks like, hey, shoot us some times, and we'll try to make it work or whatever in terms of meeting and talking about this, as opposed to saying, hey, thank you so much, John, for your inquiry here. Here are some times that we could actually meet. Feel free to click and it will automatically book you with that time.
So that accountability piece really has to be there,
Oh yeah.
in term for sure. And so I have another question in the terms of, um, you talked about the champion, and typically the champion is the person that is kind of leading the charge. And you'd have to always have a champion, I would imagine, for this to work. It couldn't work without it. I know you had talked about having buy-in from the senior leadership team and the sales. And is your champion often the leader or the visionary?
So the champion, let me sort of phrase that a little bit differently. So the champion's actually not on your internal company side and that sort of thing. Because when I'm collaborating with these companies, I'm embedded in the companies. I'm their CMO essentially, right? What I mean
Yeah.
is the champions for the companies that are being sold to, right? Um, so basically, what I mean by that is imagine that there's a manager of a call. Let's say it's a call center software, and it's a manager of a call center. And basically, what they hear from people all the time is just like the dropped calls are terrible from this system. It's so bad. We need to resolve this, right? And so the call center manager is like, I'm hearing this so much. I'm going to go out and research this or whatever. And they find a few different, let's say, call softwares, that sort of thing. And then they evaluate and then they're going through the process. But they're the ones who are like, okay, procurement, what do you need? And blah, blah, blah. So they're the internal champion that
Got
that your sales team's partnering with in order to get the deal across the line. And most of the time there is one of those. Somebody has to be driving the decision. Like if people are just like sort of leaning back and that sort of thing at the company, if everybody's leaning back, then nobody's going to move.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification. I
Oh,
definitely, I was thinking something different, so thank you for that.
it's a lot of
Um,
content, Lindsay. So I understand for sure.
and oh, okay, here we go. Kathy has a question. How do you identify the champion in the buyer company, which I think you kind of
Yeah.
alluded to, in the sense that they're the ones that are identifying a problem, it sounds like.
If honestly, if you talk to sales, they'll be able to identify it. Like the salesperson will be able to identify it. And it's easier to identify the bigger the transaction and that sort of thing, right? So basically, like let's say you're FreshBooks and you're selling into like, SMBs and that sort of thing. If you're trying to craft like what does it look like from a, small business perspective, might be a bit harder, but there it's probably like the owner of the company if it's a super small company, like that sort of thing. But most of the time, the salesperson could say, "Yeah, this is who it is." And even if they can't say who it is per se, you could probably just look at email interactions within the CRM, email back and forth, that sort of thing. It's the person that was sort of part of the like they're part of the most meetings, they were privy to the most of the emails, like that sort of thing.
You talked about, I know we're almost on time here, but I have a few more questions.
Sure.
You talked about re-examining your ICP. And is there a specific timeline that you would suggest it for companies? Um, is there like, I guess, pain points that you want to look at? um, in
Yeah.
order to re-examine, like when you can see that you're like, okay, we got to re-examine, this isn't working kind of thing. Are
Yeah.
there specific pain points you would suggest?
So, I mean, I probably recommend it depends on the size of company and how big the growth is and that sort of thing. But the companies I work with, again, B2B SaaS raise between 3 and 15 million. So call it anywhere between 5 and 1 mil or 5 ARR. For them, I'd suggest annually taking a look because these are growing very quickly. They're growing by, 2x, 3x, 5x in a year. So taking a look at what that actually looks like. It's actually the thing is though, and I'm sure most people on this call like sort of thought about this, like the idea of understanding, hey, is our mix of the top clients from a revenue perspective or fastest growing clients from a revenue perspective, is that changing? Is that changing? Did
Right.
that change dramatically over the last 3 months? If it did, then a reexamination on a quarterly basis might be merited. But if it hasn't, then probably not.
Okay. Oh, we just had a really nice comment. Thanks for putting this together. Thanks, Stephen. I guess in terms of the clients that you typically serve, have you ever had that where they're experienced tremendous growth very rapidly? If they didn't have that plan in place, is it much harder to kind of go back to the drawing board once they've gotten there? Does it get overwhelming, or is it just the same principles regardless of the growth or the size of the company?
I mean, generally what I see is that like they can't continue to do things the same way that they're doing them because basically what they've done to sort of compensate is actually hire more people and hire more
Right.
people, in almost like a linear fashion to the growth of the company, right? But they know that they need to decouple the revenue growth from the cost base. And in order to do that, they do need to be more methodical about it. That's kind of the idea is that in and a big thing that I should mention too, right, is and this is a big thing for folks to and leaders to sort of do is that when you're focusing on a particular ICP and a particular and a buyer journey that's there, that actually means, and this is going to be tough, saying no to certain clients, saying no to revenue, right? That client that comes through, and they really want to work with you and that sort of thing, but you know that you don't fit with that industry. It hasn't worked for you, that sort of thing. Say, because and they've demanded so much on the back end and they churned after year one and that sort of thing. Saying no to that revenue up front is probably the hardest transition I see founders kind of go through is that they have to go from a place where like we can make it work. Let's figure it out. That sort of thing. It's like, no, you have figured it out. You figured it out with this core, and we're going to get 1,000 times more of these clients that you knock it out of the park with. But it means saying yes to that, yes to focus, and no to revenue that's more of a wild goose chase.
Yeah, which is difficult because any sales, like just getting the sales is, some might think that
There's a
that's
dopamine
success,
hit.
right?
There's also a
Yeah,
dopamine
yeah,
hit, right? I mean, there's a like chemical sort of stuff going on here. So I don't blame folks, but just having that self-awareness and understanding that we're shifting from being scrappy, spaghetti at the wall, like whatever. We're shifting from that to a more methodical approach that allows us to scale and decouple revenue from cost.
right. And then I think there's also that values match as well. Like when you're working with companies that match your values. I know we're very
Yeah.
Amplify is very big on matching values. You talked about client validation process, so I would assume that that would play. That's what you're talking about here. Is like we're not taking everyone. We're going to take the ones that are really working. Is that kind of where this
Yeah.
would
So
play in?
So what I mean, yeah. So what I mean, if you're just strictly looking at the spreadsheet and you're seeing, wow, this client's fantastic from a revenue perspective. Our average client's 100K. These people are 500K. That's great. But you talk to the head of client success or the person managing the account, and they are about to go on stress leave because it is just like so tough to work with them. They're not understanding. They're very demanding. It's a really, really, really tough relationship, and it's not this one person's fault and that sort of thing on your team, right? Do you want 1,000 of those clients? No, you don't. Like that's not
Okay.
scalable, and you're probably going to lose that client at some point, or you need to have an adjustment of expectations or something like that. But that's that piece of, like if you imagine you were to present a plan to client success and that person saying, hey, we want 1,000 more clients just like that one that you absolutely hate. That person's going to quit the next day, right?
Right. Yeah, that's yeah, very good point. And that just goes also for the buy-in piece too. Like if your team is not enjoying the clients that they're working with and it's just a grind and you're like, oh
Yeah.
my goodness, I'm back at it. We've got a million questions, nothing's good enough. That's gonna create
Yeah.
that resistance as well.
Well, and even from a cold sort of perspective, like just from an EBITDA, like profitability on that is not going to be good. Um, employee churn is very expensive.
Right.
Switching like a new account manager onto an account, that takes a lot of work. So, even if you don't care about people, there's actually I'd argue a financial imperative to care for people.
That sounds so absolute, even if you don't care about people. Um, but
I
it's
care
true
about
though. Like
people.
some,
I care about people, but I'm just saying, even if you are like, Scrooge, then it does make sense.
yeah, no, I understand. Do we have any other questions in the that you'd like to for our guests here? Anyone else have any questions or clarification points that they'd like Michael to make? I've really enjoyed this topic. We use a lot of these principles in our own sales price process. So
Great.
it was really neat to see all of the lingo and everything. I really enjoyed it and just seeing how you put it all together. It is a very large topic, so I know we're just scratching the surface of it. But I really enjoyed and I think you did a really great job.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me, Lindsay. Really appreciate it. And no, thanks to Amplify for having me. And if anybody does have any questions that they might have, feel free to shoot me a LinkedIn message and that sort of thing. Happy to answer from there.
Awesome. Well, it looks like we are all done the Q&A section of our AHA with Amplify. Thank you for joining us this year. It's been an amazing 2024, and we're just so excited that we're excited for 2025. I can't believe that we're already almost there, but thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. And thank you, Michael, for just being such a great presenter and giving us a very important topic, especially moving into the future of AI and all the things.
No worries. Well, thanks again for having me and have a great day, everyone.
Thanks.